On November 25th, 2022, I watched a video that changed my little deer brain forever. The video in question was The Autistic Horror of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, in parentheses Season 1, by Patricia Taxon. It was a video in which Patty goes on this 32-minute nightmare in which she gives the YouTube web series Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared a very personal reading, tying it to her own messy and devastating experiences from her own childhood. At that point, I had only been a fan of her work, music and essay-wise, for a couple of months, but I was already deeply invested in her production. Watching art, Paris God, was my very first exposure to the concept of disarming people through absurdity. It was the video that introduced me to Everything Everywhere All at Once, which would soon become my favorite film of all time. The Autistic Horror of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, in parentheses Season 1, was the very first video I got to see on the day that it came out from her. That day, I woke up at 4 in the morning for some fucking reason to see a notification on my phone telling me how Patricia had just uploaded a video. I remember hiding in my covers like a little kid as to not wake up my brother, which I shared a room with at the time. I remember that very specific feeling of anticipation, because every time I interacted with her work, some crazy development would happen in my own personal life. I remember the shuddering cold outside my window while I pressed play. And I remember the very specific type of excitement that I felt as I began to hear her own voice. But I don't have any memories of watching the video itself.
This is a video about conceptualizing an art piece.
I am currently studying a digital art major, specializing in animation and contemporary art. And thus far, one of the things that I find most important about how I go about making stuff is to demystify the process of actually making something deep and thoughtful, rather than just having the illusion that something that is profound. We all know how deeply pretentious people who are in the spaces of contemporary art can be, and I am deeply aware of what it means to be on the side of contemporary art too, especially in the times that we are in. Conceptual art and works outside of the established norm is often dismissed and treated with cynicism. This video is a sort of journal. It is the result of 7 years of trying to make art, and 2 of studying art while being in college. If I have learned anything in the dumpster fire that is this education system, it is to find love and purpose in the fact that nothing is ever simple, and how, in the art that we make, deeply think about the relationship between medium and message, between rhetoric and argument, can enrich the things we make. And then, of course, that comes from research. Maybe we can understand that at a base level, being more knowledgeable of the topic will lead to more accurate and rich depictions or critiques of something. But the reason why I do so much research before beginning to make anything is because of the goals that I want to achieve with my own final product. So in this video, we are going to explore an art project that I am currently making, which I don't even know the medium of yet. It is a piece that originally started as a vent, which slowly turned into a deep dive of a specific psychological concept, which then transformed into a piece of poetic visual language, which intends to deform the person who sees it to... Well, I can't tell you my final goal right now, so let's get into it. The process of conceptualizing this artwork began in therapy. As of recently, I have been slowly chewing away at many aspects of my own childhood, specifically very negative aspects and experiences, all of which are linked to my own disability, my autism. I was properly diagnosed in the year 2022 when I was 17 years old, and I know of how very fortunate I am to get a diagnosis in general. But that still implies that for more than a decade and a half, I went about my life without knowing this part of myself. This information that could have helped teachers, family members, and even myself, people who didn't have the tools to help me manage and support my way of living. My childhood was defined by abuse and negligence because of my condition, mostly feeling like an animal more than a person. And I feel like there's a single event that exemplifies this in a perfectly manner. I was 8 years old, and I went to a Catholic school for only men. something that even as a kid I didn't really understand, and that I still wish that I didn't up to this day. When I was a kid, I wasn't able to understand many things, and I had a lot of difficulties understanding gender dynamics, especially the ones that were imposed on me by that type of school. In my own personal life today, I completely negate the gender binary and the attributes that define it. But this is something that I've always had, even as a kid, and even if I didn't understand it. If I enjoyed something, I just knew that it was. I didn't understand if it was for boys or for girls. And through the influence of my sister, I ended up with many likings that were more associated with the feminine. I cannot emphasize enough how natural that was for me. My own conscience and my own way of thinking were very simple and worked when I was by myself. The problem was when the outside world got involved. I didn't have neither problem nor guilt when I watched the 2010 reboot of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. It was something that I shared with my sister, but I knew that for whatever reason, I had to watch something else whenever my dad arrived at my home. I didn't understand, as a person who was a silent male at birth, that I needed to be attracted by Max Steel, Dragon Ball, or Sonic the Hedgehog. And even with my very small perspective of the world, I had the capacity to see the values inside of things, and not the acknowledgements or values that they were trying to impose on me. And that was an ability that was taken away. It was the end of a school day, and we were separated by groups as we waited for our parents to pick us up. So therefore, we didn't have much supervision. And as weird as I was back then, and I still am today, I still had friends. Few, but I clinged to them, as they were my last line of defense against the world.
Always trying to get closer to them, to find more likings in common. And for the first time, I accidentally revealed my liking for the previously mentioned series of My Little Pony.
Which was very popular at the time. Telling that secret didn't lead to a moment of connection between that friend and me. My mind freezing up, incapable of finding the words to confirm or negate that that was true or not, which only led to a questioning, more passionate and irritating. What happened after that is kind of blurry. The process of conceptualizing this work has helped me to regain some of my memories about that day, but not everything is clear. It is no surprise that a person like me had to deal with bullying in my daily life when I was a kid. With the attributes that I had, and I still have to this day,
I was practically begging people to bully me.
and that happened that day, as one of the people who mistreated me heard about that confession, which only led to mockery and verbal abuse. Little by little, more people my age would begin to approach me, astounded, and of course some even disgusted by that secret, that in a couple of minutes had already turned into a rumor. After that, there's still a complete blank in my memory, but it couldn't have lasted more than 5 minutes. But it was the complete difference between simple insults
And physical aggression.
I was thrown to the floor. My body splayed in the wild tiles as people that I don't recognize took my own belt
From my pants. The only thing that I could do in that moment was cover my face, as I felt the strength of those people hitting me with my own belt. That whole series of events couldn't have lasted longer than an hour. It started with my confession, and it ended in the moment that someone came to pick me up. But those 60 minutes managed to change me. And even after those kids had grown tired of hitting me, throwing my own belt in my face in the process, it would still take another half an hour for someone to see me. No teacher came for me. Neither my brothers or my parents. The person who found me was a friend of my dad, which had no emotional tool or context to deal with the son of his friend, bleeding on the floor.
Those kids that left me without the ability to walk are victims, just as I am. We were trained like animals, conditioned to destroy everything that didn't enter that norm that we lived under, knowing that they would suffer the same if they, too, didn't follow the rule. That kid suffered through many unmet needs because of negligence and a lack of money. That kid never had the privilege of knowing what was going inside of his mind, or what his parents thought of him. He never had the tools to understand the world around him. And in the moment that kid was given a chance to start again, to start new, he decided to die. I would only begin to understand why something like that could happen to me until very recently. In that moment, that kid became a gender activist, even if he didn't mean to or wanted to. That showcase of love for something typically associated with femininity was probably the first time those poor kids had an encounter with something very slightly outside of the gender binary. Most, if not all, people who go to these types of school go through a process of indoctrination of religion, social class dynamics, and especially gender ideology. Up to that point, I had spent around a year and a half in that school, and ironically, my autism was the only thing that kept me from being molded like clay to be an enforcer of said beliefs. But in that moment that I showed that the system of indoctrination wasn't working on one of its students, all of that reasoning about gender that at that point I didn't understand had to be inflicted into me through violence. And it worked. It would be very easy to say that this single event is in a vacuum, something that changed my mind and damaged it when I was a kid. But sadly, that isn't the case. What managed to break that kid were the innumerable memories of bad treatments made without intention. The use of labels replacing a professional diagnosis. What do we do with all of this baggage? I think that at a surface level, there are some ways and tools that can be used to make art out of this experience, and I think that is totally valid. There are some very cool ways to make what we know today as vent art, but I am here to argue about researching a bit further than that, and that's why I have to go into detail about my own personal experience. After so much time of letting these experiences rest in my mind, not letting myself obsess over them, and going to therapy, I can see between the lines of the context in which I was raised. Being angry at those kids who assaulted me would be similar to being angry at a hurricane or an earthquake. They didn't have any tools to deal with a showcase of femininity in an all-men school. Again, being complacent in a situation of indoctrination would lead to more abuse for them. They are victims too. The project started to take form after I began to note all of the ways my identity and behavior were molded by this experience. The way that I perceive the world is fundamentally different because I was abused. There was a before and an after. I, Sawyer Jose Morales, are only 9 years old. I am an adult with adult needs and wants who was born in 2016. So we have these two very big ideas. The exploration of my identity through the lens of my autism, and the trauma that came from having the condition in an indoctrinating system. These two topics could lead to entire lifetimes of work, and it would be too broad to explore them in a single artistic project. Sometimes we want to cover everything in a single painting, single installation, or a single YouTube video, but that is where people land in projects that are unfocused. Everything in the world around us is complicated and fascinating. So what I did was to slowly begin to thread away and begin to find spaces where these two giant topics are in conversation and relate to one another to begin my investigation. I began to look into the way that my brain organizes information due to these traumas. I do not feel like I am the same person who I was before those events, before I moved into this city. In my head, the change of environment, people, and even small things like the climate resulted in the beginning of a new life, and poetically, in the way that I saw myself, even if I wasn't able to articulate it in the past. And so I came up with the poetic idea of having two different people representing my life, putting the person who I am today as a result of a replacement of the kid that was before me. Is that tragic? Is that cathartic? I don't know, but I want to explore the idea. The exploring of this base concept, the cause and effect of the trauma that that kid experienced in comparison to my current living experience, could lead to dozens of artistic projects, all from different angles of investigation. So far, I have found these ways that these events have influenced my life. I have seen this cause and effect in my overall social life, my way of interacting with people who are close to me, my behavioral traits in school and work, my sexual life, my view of gender as a concept, my ways of expressing special interests, and so on. Trying to go over all of these cause and effects phenomena in a single project would be a very bad thing. Here is where I need to share a very scary truth about artistic production. It is something that we need to be aware of because it is very common to fall into that trap no matter your skill level, and that is the concept of being too broad. Huh? But wouldn't going over multiple topics at the same time give the project more depth? To have these topics being in conversation with one another? Yes, but also no. I need all of us to be in the same page in terms of this whole research thing. We all live in a universe in which everything is complicated, which is very good and a very bad thing. I could write entire theses on how childhood trauma affects social behavior, and many people have before. I could write an essay about how autistic people on different sides of the spectrum express their own special interests and how healthy or unhealthy that can be. Even these 6 points I gave before are already on threadings of the bigger topics of autism. This is what we know to be the theory of complex thinking, written originally by Edgar Morin. Everything is complicated. Autism as a topic is too broad to go over in a single project. Trauma and its relationship with the autistic experience is too broad, and making a list of behaviors that stem from this trauma is too broad as well. We, people who want to be on the side of art, need to keep on threading, keep digging in this hole that is reality. We must find different specific angles, which can only stem from our own personal experiences and interests. And here is where I will introduce another idea that is very important to artistic production and research, which is the individual. How can a person choose a single angle to go over an infinitely broad topic? The answer is inside of you. We are products of our own context. Originally, I didn't really know what angle to give this project that I have been making, slowly unthreading all of the conducts that I have, until, looking at my own experience, I realized what angle I could go over for this project, which is my sexual life. In this theory of complex thinking, it is argued that we need everyone's unique personal experiences to keep contributing and to keep building on the knowledge that came before us, not to make concrete definition of the things in the world around us, but to complexify and to make deeper. And this theory argues that, in the moment in which we all seemingly agree on a single topic, the topic dies. And it is the discourse that we have about everything that keeps making the world a richer place. I don't think that we will ever be in a world in which we all seemingly understand each other's sexual behavior, but in this impossible task, it is impossible for me to stop. I am chasing the horizon until infinity, and I am finding purpose in it. That's what makes the world a better place. In this wide horizon, I chose a single spot to explore, and now, my job is to find another infinite depth in that single small spot in reality. But how do we do this? I chose this topic, my sexual life, because I have seen people find compelling ways to explore it before, and I want to contribute to that conversation. I realize now how many of the mistreatments in my childhood developed themselves into sexual behaviors that make me a much happier person, and for the longest time I wasn't even aware of it. I want to evoke the beautiful divergent way that I engage with my sexual partner, the search for unique sensory experiences in erotic moments. This appropriation turned into fulfillment, turning my erotic life into an expression and relating it to the past, making it complex and not explaining it as a simple cause and effect. And now we can begin investigating, and I think I have a very clear place where to start. I can't emphasize enough how good your production will be if you accept and embrace your own context. I myself are married to my favorite artworks, and I take them to make them my own. For example, I am a part of an autistic lineage of art, an ongoing conversation of depictions of divergent living. I came up with this concept myself. Before me, there was Patricia Taxon, who, when I was 17, broke me with not only the Don't Hug Me I'm Scared video, but also with her album, The Flowers of Robert Mapplethorpe, in which I could see my own experience in how I experience sexual attraction and romantic love through my autism. I saw an exploration of her own trauma, blatantly and nakedly shown through music and prowess. It showed me parts of myself that I had never explored before, and it shook me to my core. When Patricia was 11, she saw a film by the name of Pompoko from Studio Ghibli and directed by Isao Takahata, and, as she explains on her essay on the ethics of boinking animal people, she saw herself reflected in the characters on the film, given an autistic reading of the movie that is rich, in a way that not many films from the 90s can. It is rich and nuanced. We don't know, and sadly never will, if any of the autistic themes shown on screen are intentional, but that doesn't take away what Patricia took away from the film. And Takahata, to make this film, had to see himself in art before him as well, and the people before him did too, and so on, ad infinitum. To make an artwork rich, it means to hug the people that inspire you to start this project, to read into their work and to pick apart what you take from it. We all know that all art is just stealing, but I think that's kind of a cynical way to look at it. The way that I managed to see it is that whenever you remake something that you love, what you'll make will be tainted with your own experience, therefore making something new through the person who's making it. We must be fully conscious of this to embrace our own perspective and use it as our main tool to reflect the events in the world around us, because if we lean too much into the remaking aspect, we might end up making a copy of something else, of course. For this project, I have my own handful of referential artists. I chose to look at Patricia Taxon, the previously mentioned Don't Hug Me I'm Scared video, and her album The Flowers of Robert Mapplethorpe for the reasons mentioned before. But I also take her album Safari Apps and the way that it represents the concept of love, and her album Wax Under Wokenum too, and the way that it represents the concept of identity, for reasons that I will specify later. I like many of Patricia's albums, but sadly I can't use them all as reference for the work that I am trying to make. One thing that we must keep in mind is how every reference that we have must contribute to the topic we are trying to convey, and the way that I have to determine if something contributes to a project is to just justify it. I can say, this artwork contributes to this project in this way, and I think that if you can justify it, you can use anything as reference. In terms of visual artists, I look at people like Twist. I am endeared to her way of drawing furries. Wait, furries? Why would I use furries in my work? I also need to justify that, no? And for that, I wanted to remark the previously mentioned essay on the ethics of boinking animal people. God, I love that title. In which Patricia presents a definition of what being a furry and furry art is. In it is explained how furry imagery is built on three main axes, which is the symbolic, the sensory, and the autistic, and how these three attributes, individually and in conversation with one another, are tools for divergent human expressions in the contemporary time that we are in. It goes over how furry art speaks of the feeling of being treated as unhuman, something that of course fits perfectly onto the project that I'm trying to make, and my production in general. I beg of you to please watch that video if you want to see those points explained in depth. The thing is that this video blurs the line between an artistic and a theoretical reference, the latter being something that we haven't even touched yet. And to describe this, I can set up an example. An artistic project and a research paper can argue the same thing, but they are fundamentally different in the way that they express and argue for that thing. I have been taught on the richness that comes from having both artistic and theoretical references. I can use both Basil's beautiful expression of childhood trauma and how he coped with it, as well as the text 10 Questions About Transdiscipline by Rigoberto Lanz to tie my artistic production to neurology research to make my depictions of the artistic sexual experience richer. But what counts as a theoretical reference? An artistic reference can be almost anything if you can justify it well enough, but theoretical references are a bit harder to point down. For this project, the impact of childhood trauma and personality kinkiness in adulthood by Kendall Hillier, which is a scientific paper, could be a referential. But at the same time, the artistic symbol by Francisca Perez Carreno could also be a reference, and these two texts are universes apart in the topics that they go over. The artistic projects that we make become so much richer by having theoretic support behind them. So I say that any of these texts can be useful to give even more depth to the things we make. For this project, I can look at contemporary gender theory, I can look at Rebecca Sugar's dialogue about contemporary relationships outside of the binary between platonic and romantic, which that in of itself ties into sexual liberation as something that I'm working on here. I can look at Clap Seal's video essay on why people make personas to justify and refine the way that I'm going to showcase myself as a persona in both time periods. We can use them to tie different concepts together to move people and disarm. Leaving people in the dark in terms of this knowledge is actively making the world a worse place. So, to cap this video off, I am going to recap all of the concepts that were mentioned before, now in context of this artistic project that I have been talking about. So thank you so much for staying up to this point. This project has 3 instances: the firstness, the secondness, and the thirdness. For me, I think that this is the most important part about structuring an artwork. We must be aware of where we come from and with our goal in mind of where we are going. The firstness is the emotional reaction we have to something. The secondness is the technical research. And the thirdness is the creation of new ways to represent a certain topic, and it is where we find nuance. In the firstness, we have that gap in my memory because of the analysis of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. I was upset, and I didn't know why. Patricia's work had touched me, and because I was moved, I began to research. Simultaneously, my other first instance was my abuse, and not knowing of the ways that that abuse had shaped me, and yet still being affected by it all the same. The secondness is the pure hard research we do to understand the topic, yet is still far from becoming something that could touch people in an emotional level. Here is where I began to research my own context. I began to see that those kids were victims of the system of Catholic oppression as much as I was. I began to see the full extent of the ways that those events affected me, to then choose my own sexual life as a part of this whole, and beginning to understand that through describing this small part, I can speak more of the whole than by speaking of its entirety. I began to see artists like Patty in a new light. Some of her work and the readings I give it are cornerstones of the way that I think about the topic I'm going to go over, and being aware of that, I can use that original artwork in my own. In 2022, my second instance was getting diagnosed with autism. Here, I will begin to represent all of these years of abuse with furry imagery. I was treated as something less than human, so I became an animal. And inside of that imagery, there is much value as well. The third instance is to not use all of that prior research to explain the cause and effect of my behavior. It is used to begin comprehending and engaging others. In this artwork, my own representation is meant to transcend, and the person who perceives my work, instead of thinking about who the artist who made it, will think about their own relationship with their own reading of what they are perceiving. I will show my spirit, a spirit that wants to love because of the abuse. I will never fully understand all of the intricacies of the relationship between ableism and religion, of furry representations and the feelings of dehumanization. But it is impossible for me to stop trying, and in that process I begin to comprehend my spirit, turning it into a symbol for people to talk about and create further things. I will comprehend. And with all of the codes that I have gathered with my own past experience, inspired by the people before me and my loved ones, I look back at my abuse with tenderness. And with humility and confidence, I want you to make your own video essays. In all of these years of making art, This video essay has always been in the back of my mind. I do photography, animation, painting, and so on. But for me, the medium of the video essay, as much as it can be contorted and used maliciously, is a medium that exemplifies that humility and confidence that I mentioned before. They are uploaded on public platforms, and they are used to reach as many people as they can. They don't exclude people by complicating the way that we explain certain concepts, which are already hard to grasp. The people who make video essays are on the side of humanity. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Jacob Geller. His video, The Quiet Sadness of Super Mario Galaxy, is very dear to my heart. It was the very first video essay that I ever saw, back when I was 14. It was my introduction to giving media any type of reading. He gives a thematic look to the fact that each time that you collect a star in-game, the game pulls you out to what's essentially just a level select. And to be honest, it felt life-assuring to watch. Because 3 years later, I would watch Art Furry's God by Patricia Taxon. If it weren't for that video, I wouldn't be a contemporary artist today, and I wouldn't be on the side of art. There is something that I haven't told you yet. It may seem that this methodology for making art could only be used by professional productions. But no. For example, all of these concepts have been used by me to write this video essay. My firstness was all of those video essays that I have seen in the past, and the original sense of euphoria that came from watching them for the first time. For example, The Shape of Infinity by Jacob Geller, how we made an animated music video by Scruffy, as well as, Scruffy gushes about the ending of Outer Wilds, that was great. But also Nexpo's series on Petscop, and videos like The Ghibli Film That Changed My Life by The Soak, and so on. My references are these texts that I have been beaten over the head with, which are indeed very valuable tools. For example, we have 10 questions about transdiscipline by Rigoberto Lanz, The Artistic Design by Francisca Perez Carreño, and the text What is a Text, as well as the teacher who lent me those texts, Diego Ortega and Fernando Gardelli. The video essay is such a lovingly flexible medium. My artistic referentials for this are the editing and illustration style of Scruffy, as well as the dry and emotional acting of Patricia Taxon. I see the way that Rebecca Sugar talks in interviews, and I want to do the same in my own way. I am even seeing the way that Noodle Gaming pulls the rug with an end-of-video twist, like I am doing right now. And most important of all is that I am indeed going to put this on YouTube, so you will always have this resource. My secondness has been my writing process, figuring out how to best communicate all of these different art and investigation concepts, because I myself have been taught all of this in a rather awful manner. I have been subjected to inhuman treatment in the college that I attend to. I am given 17 trillion books to read overnight, and I am expected to understand it all by the next day. That's why I think there's such a gigantic rift between the people who are deeply knowledgeable of these topics and who are unable to explain this to someone who isn't aware, and the people who aren't being allowed into the system of methods without going through the hell that I go through every day. My thirdness is what you're seeing. I don't know if I have achieved it, but this essay is what Art Furry's God was to me back in 2022. A small window in which I could look through and begin to see the world of contemporary art, not from the side of pretension and snobbery, but from the side of honesty and love. I feel so fortunate to be of the few people who know about this, and I want to be the one to pull more into the light. Because of the love that my life is defined in, I want you to feel like you have the right to ask, to learn slowly, and to add to the conversation. We need the opinions and views of everyone to make the world a better place. So keep talking, keep discussing with others, let yourself be changed, and let yourself be loved by the creations of others. I wanted to leave you off with a passage I wrote as a mission statement of my entire production, and I would love to read your own. Let my divergence be good for the world, through acceptance and confrontation. My artistic production is the act of showing my own identity, nakedly, presented only as itself, with no tag to define it. The reason why my work begins dialogues is because we live in a world that imposes it to happen. I have a deep hatred of the fact that so many of my means of expressions and my ways of living can be taken as a sign of rebellion, that I cannot live through life without questioning, that I need to justify every single thing I do, because I know that those inquiries come from a place of ignorance and fear, ignorance that I am, I can only be, and that every day I fight for the right of being. But despite, or maybe because of that, I can't help but to love the past, the present, and the future for both this video essay and this research project, because both of them are love for the self. I know that all these different concepts are enough to create discourse, just by the way that I express my own way of being. This is my way of controlling how people seemingly come into conflict through my own existence, by their standards being seen as autistic and queer. I take that facet of hatred, and through the love that I have for myself, and that I have for the world, I create.
Circles with my car, and with this hope one would save me. Maybe then I'd be as a lover is, a lover was, a lover does. Clementine, galvanized, Patrick, or love it is, loving was, an Autobahn passing on to the sun. Be as a lover is.